10 years later. Chapter 2. Sabrina Sabria.
Stop spinning your gun, cadet.
Sabrina bounced the blaster upright so that it pirouetted briefly, its battery case on her knuckle, before she knocked it into her holster with a satisfied flick of her opposite hand.
Unnecessary,
Sean said. A question, sir. Sean paused, his head turning a fraction of a degree towards her. The setting sun streaming down the alleyway between buildings struck his face at such an angle that she could see his blue eyes behind his visor. The late afternoon light made his skin look tawny, and the laughter lines around his eyes and mouth more prominent.
Go ahead.
Do you disapprove because you can't do it? Sabrina asked, suppressing a smile. Sean let out a gruff, and returned to the screens projected before his eyes, his hands moving in the air in front of him as he switched between menus.
I like my face attached, that's all, he said. Although maybe some plasma burns could improve yours.
I'm reporting you to my supervisor, Sabrina said, leaning against the wall and stretching her legs, the carbon fiber flex bands of her patrol suit creaking. Sean completed his inventory of their shift assignments, lifted his visor, and started down the alleyway to the sidewalk.
Let's go. One assignment left today.
The sun shone directly into their eyes as they turned the corner onto Carnap Avenue. Despite the glare, Sean kept his visor up and told Sabrina to do the same.
The less distance between you and the residents, the better,
he said, tugging at his uniform jacket to cover up his blaster as well. Sabrina zipped her jacket and doubled her pace to keep up with Sean's long strides. The avenue between the row houses was crowded with produce and cooking carts, each surrounded by residents stopping on their way home from work. The air smelled of rosemary and aniseed. A young girl sprayed a golden cloud of mist on a wheelbarrow of kale and turnips, turning the lime leaves and pink tubers a dark emerald and bloody red. The moisture and the bright colors created a convincing illusion of abundance, but dust still gathered at their feet, on their sleeves, in their eyes. The desert was never far. The sand pooling in the gutters and creating a haze over their heads was a constant reminder. Occasionally, Sabrina could even smell it, as a breeze carrying the scent of sage and tamarisk wafted over rooftops and down an alleyway. Sean led them into the periphery of a pitchball match, delaying long enough that when the ball rolled his way, he had a moment to juggle it up and away from the children and kick it to her. She trapped it under her foot. Are we dispensing with all formality?
Bond with the community, and you'll have all the partners you ever need, Sean said. I do have the highest rate of solved cases in the station, and it's not because of my interrogation techniques.
Sabrina tipped the ball onto the top of her foot before towing it to her knees, her thighs, then her head, where she balanced it for a few moments. The children cheered when she kicked it back to them.
Look,
Sean said, nodding across the street to where the children's mothers were also clapping for her. Sabrina felt her cheeks flush.
Don't be embarrassed. They're proud of you. How many of them do you think wanted to play sports when they were younger? Or even wanted to join the security ministry?
Sabrina fell back into a steady pace beside him.
I can't be responsible for all their hopes and dreams. But you are,
Sean said, breaking stride for a moment to look her in the face. She felt a stirring within her, a tremor from her mouth down to the base of her spine when he turned his sharp, clear eyes to her.
You are. And you're ready, too. Tell me about our friend Mr. Elias Orham.
Repair shop owner, 23 years of age, she said, matching his stride again. No prior arrests or citations. A few disciplinary actions while in school, nothing unusual for a non-academically inclined teenage boy. Apprenticed briefly as a machinist before inheriting his uncle's shop here. Has not attended any tertiary education.
And your visor's up. You are reciting this from memory,
Sean said, glancing sidelong at her. I studied our daily mission briefing last night, she said.
And I thought you spent all your time just practicing twirling your gun.
That is only when you are talking, sir.
Sean
laughed, and Sabrina felt the tremor return with a pleasant rush.
Why are we paying him a visit?
He asked. The pharmacy on Grayling Street is suspected of distilling illegal spirits. There have been reports of late-night activity during quiet hours, and rates of violent incidents have increased in the neighborhood. The reports center around the shop," she said.
"Why is this important?"
"Rates of violent crime sometimes portend cult activity, although there have never been any reports of it in this neighborhood."
"Never say never,"
Sean said, studying the addresses of the houses. Sabrina slowed enough that Sean came to a stop a few feet ahead and turned back to look at her, the flow of pedestrians parting around them. "Is there a point I'm missing?" The corner of Sean's mouth twisted downward, and he rubbed the late-day shadow of whiskers on his face.
"To be honest, I don't know."
Foot traffic continued to pass on either side of them, men with their vests folded over their arms, their underarms dark with perspiration, women with their hair pinned up to expose their necks, glistening with sheens of sweat, and children, their book satchels bouncing on their hips. Sabrina wanted to slip her own uniform jacket off, but it would expose her weapon and her patrol suit. Wrapped in carbon mesh armor, flex bands, and servo plates, Sean was right. They would look removed from the daily scene playing out around them. "I'm not sure what you mean," Sabrina said, raising her hand to her face to block the sun. Sean stepped closer to her and spoke in a lower register.
"What do you think of Elias Orham?"
"I tried not to form any premature conclusions."
"Good. That's what you're trained to do. Now, forget your training."
"Forget my training?"
"Yup. Your gut tells you something." "What?"
She raked through the information in her mind again, but could come up with nothing. "Elias Orham is relatively unremarkable."
"You are exactly right," Sean said. "He is completely unremarkable. And that is remarkable, isn't it?"
"I'm not sure I get you."
"There may be nothing to get. He could just be a humble guy of limited ambition, in a humble profession, in a humble shop."
"So I was concluding," Sabrina said.
"But most young men I've known have some degree of ambition. Nothing feeds the ego like youth and naivete. How many would be content to work in a little shop on this street the rest of their lives?"
"Maybe he aspires to start more shops."
"Good observation. Keep it in mind when you interrogate him."
Sean nodded toward a set of stairs leading to the basement of a row house next to them.
"After you."
"This is the place?" Sabrina asked, looking up at the row house. It had been refurbished since the transition, with new light fixtures and a fresh coat of standard ministry-approved paint. The basement door, however, looked as if it belonged to a different building. Paint peeled off its face in long, curled leaves, revealing rusted metal beneath.
"Cadet?"
Sean smiled.
"You've done the legwork. You interrogate him. I'm going to look for a new gyroscope for my CRP."
Sabrina opened her mouth to speak but could not find the words. After a few aborted attempts, she stopped completely, aware that she likely resembled a fish gasping for air. "Yes, sir," she finally said. The bottom of the door screeched on the floor as she freed it from the jam. The air on the other side smelled of copper, oil, and dirt. The space was dark. The window at ground level was clouded with sand and dust. If Elias Orham had ambitions for his shop, they were not apparent in the haphazard way items were thrown together on the sagging, overcrowded shelves. Vacuum tubes, fuel blenders, gyroscopes, hovers, suspensor clamps, many covered in cobwebs, all vied for shelf space. Sean gravitated towards the shelves holding tired-looking gyroscopes, nodding at Sabrina to continue. She navigated around more overcrowded tables and tilting shelves and stopped at a worn counter in the back of the shop. A stick of incense was burning in a pot of dirt. In the stale air, the smoke hovered, undisturbed, in a wispy layer at the level of her head. Sabrina heard a noise, a tinkling of metal on metal behind the beaded curtain that led to the back of the shop. She called out, "Hello? Mr. Orham?" Footsteps shuffled in back before a young man with chalky skin and long, lean features parted the beads with one hand. Dark circles ringed the skin below his eyes. His hair was slicked back and ran down to his collar. Well, yes?" He offered a tentative smile. He was still only halfway through the curtain. He wore a light scarf and a floor-length jacket to ward off the damp cold of the basement. An oil rag hung from his pants pocket, and a belt of wrenches was strapped beneath it. "I'm Cadet Sabrina. That is Officer Marr over there in your gyroscope aisle, she said, pointing over her shoulder with her thumb.
I might have some questions about one of these when you're finished,
Sean said with a good-natured grin. Certainly, Orhem laughed, a jagged sound that came from the back of his throat. Are you Mr. Orhem, the owner of this shop? Sabrina said, trying to return some formality to the conversation.
Yes, I am, he said, shifting his eyes back and forth between her and Sean.
We're here to ask about some reports of neighborhood disturbances, mainly centered around the pharmacy a few doors down.
Disturbances?
He said, smiling, his body rocking back and forth slightly as he wiped his hands on his oil rag.
Well, like what?
Loud, uncivilized behavior, customers coming late at night, even fights.
None of that. I've seen nothing. It's a quiet neighborhood.
He bent down to adjust the incense stick. Sabrina felt something tighten within her. He was lying. Mr. Orhem, how long have you owned this shop?
Why?
He said, moving his hand from the incense stick to roll the beads of the curtain between his fingers. Well, it just seems like an established business. But you seem young, close to my age, actually. I'm just wondering, did you run it while you were in school?
My uncle. He recently died. I inherited it, he said.
I was raised by my uncle. He's like a father to me. She smiled. Do you normally work late or leave early?
I work late. Yes. I'm often here late.
Regularly? And you have never heard any of the noises the neighbors have complained about that I mentioned earlier? The tendons in his neck twitched. He was making a fist around the beads in his hands.
Why is it of interest to you?
He asked. Well, as you know, Mr. Orhem, when neighbors complain about such activities around a pharmacy, the first thing the authorities suspect is an illegal distillery. Do you know the owner of the pharmacy in question?
No. I've seen him around. I keep to myself. I don't interact with him.
You don't? No shopkeeper guild of any sort?
I'm not a member. I'm here usually.
Sabrina noted where the touch of her hand had smeared away dust from the counter. Sean knocked over something on a shelf. Orhem snapped his head in Sean's direction. His knuckles were white around the beads. Sabrina felt her own heart beating harder in her chest. Remain calm. Don't upset the subject. You are here a lot, she said.
Yes.
Most of your work is in the back of the shop?
You need authorization to search my shop,
he said, raising his voice. Sean's footsteps moved closer. We're not here to search your premises, Mr. Orhem. Just ask questions. You've been quite helpful, she said. Sean moved up alongside her, holding a gyroscope in either hand.
You don't have a third one in back, do you?
Sean's attempt to diffuse the tension came too late. Orhem slipped from between the string of beads and jumped the counter. A number of strands came loose, raining beads down on the floor. Sabrina saw a flash in Orhem's hand, and she knew exactly what had cut the curtain.
Sean, knife!
Sean raised his arm to restrain Orhem. Orhem swung the knife directly into Sean's armpit. The gyroscopes dropped to the floor as Sean grabbed Orhem by his jacket and flung him away from his body. Orhem raised the bloody knife again, but Sean knocked Orhem's arm away and charged in close, both of them crashing into the shelves. The shelves collapsed, and an avalanche of unsold merchandise tumbled down around them. Rubber hoses, motor housing, and intake ducts flew as both men kicked to extricate themselves. Sabrina raced over the wreckage, tripping and falling, her head slamming against a drawer full of wrenches. Woozy, she squeezed herself between fallen shelves and tried to tackle Orhem. The shopkeeper recovered before she could catch him and leapt out of her reach, bolting for the stairs. The rusty door clanged shut as his feet disappeared up the steps.
Oh, Christ!
Sean swore, holding his side. He swore again when he saw the blood on his hand.
Suit can withstand a plasma blast, but he gets me with a knife.
The suit should hold up to a knife.
There are weak spots,
Sean said, rolling out of the debris and touching his hand to his armpit again.
Christ, he knew just where it was, too.
The suit had registered the breach to its structural integrity. A computerized voice in Sabrina's ear informed her that filament sensors in Sean's suit had detected the chemical signature of blood. A cascade of protocols was activating. Derm links relayed Sean's vitals to network operators at the station. Officers within a predetermined radius were receiving their location and Sean's vital signs as they spoke. The noise was too much for her, and Sabrina yanked out her earpiece. She ripped open a pocket on her thigh, removed a sterile adhesive patch, and slapped it on Sean's wound so abruptly that he cried out.
"Put your headset back on,"
Sean said between gasps. She did. Squawking voices and alarms inundated her again. Everything was moving too quickly. She flipped down her visor. Sean and her vitals ran across the bottom of her field of vision. Her heart rate was skyrocketing. So was Sean's, but at least it was steady. He pulled his visor down and began speaking into his filament microphone. Sabrina changed the readouts before her and became absorbed in the map flashing before her eyes. It displayed their position, 2 white dots in a skeleton frame of roads and buildings. The perspective zoomed out so she could see 2 blue dots, a medic unit moving in their direction, 2 green dots, the nearest 2 officers. She swore when she saw their names in bold script, tracing their progress through the streets. Pitt and Boyle. Sean relayed the description of his attacker to the operator at the station. More green units, more names she knew began to converge on their location, like iron filings drawn to a magnet. He finished, muted his microphone, and signaled for Sabrina to do the same. He began speaking in a quick but deliberate tone.
"This is the first attack on an officer since your cohort started at the academy. An attack on an officer is a Class 2 offense. It is an attack on the ministry itself. Yeah, I know. Do you know what that translates into?"
A minimum sentence of 6 months, she said. "It means 2 years of behavioral supervision."
"It means he's dead."
"What?"
"Think, cadet. He won't make it back to the station. The old guard is going to want to set an example for the new guard."
"He will kill him?"
"He will resist. It will be justified. Every report will corroborate, and every visor camera will be conveniently switched off or blocked. With all the arrests lately in the blocks, all the fights, no one will question it."
"That's murder."
"That is justice, as far as our colleagues are concerned. Welcome to the officer corps."
Sabrina swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking. She crouched on the floor and began to pull on her bootlaces, twisting their ends around her fingers, as if the tightness could still the shaking. The stairway remained empty on the far side of the door.
"But that's not me. And I know it's not you,"
Sean added. "You're still injured. What can we do?"
"Not we, but you. You've got to save him. Make it right."
"He just tried to kill you."
"Is justice settling the score? I've taught you better."
A series of choices played out in her mind. Her partner was injured, and it was her fault. The man who had done it had escaped, and was sure to be killed. But death by officer was not true justice. "A cadet is not allowed to pursue an armed suspect alone," she said.
"For Christ's sake, Sabrina, I'll cover you. Why is a repair shop owner attacking a buckethead officer playing with his gyroscopes? He's hiding something, and we'll never find out if you, don't catch him."
"You're right," she said. She checked the map on her visor. The medics were 5 blocks away, blue dots rolling through a fine-lined maze. A ring of green was closing quickly. The medics would be there in 3 minutes. She checked Sean's vitals again. The last thing she needed after getting her partner injured was a reputation for abandoning him in critical condition. But he was not in danger. The patch had stopped the bleeding. His vitals were stable.
"Go,"
he said, waving at the door.
"Sean, sir, I can't leave you." "Don't make me point my gun at you."
She made her decision. Or recognized it had been made for her. Another avalanche of junk tumbled down as she clambered over the fallen shelves to the door and tried the handle. It was locked from the outside. The patrol suit, following the movement of her eyes through her visor, was already superimposing information about the metal of the door. The surface was fatigued, but the interior was still strong. It would take too many blasts of plasma to melt through. Red lines traced the outline of the bolts that formed the door's locking mechanism. Most of them were deep in the interior. Such a heavy door and reinforced lock belonged on a vault, not a dusty repair shop. Sean was right. They had stumbled into something. The owners had something to hide. She checked the window, too small. Scans also revealed it to be reinforced.
Thanks, Sabrina.
The ceiling consisted of wood rafters. Using the visor again, she peeled away the layers. The floor above the rafters was wood with nothing but laminate surface on top. A further scan on infrared revealed the house to be empty of any inhabitants. She drew her blaster, flicked the setting with her thumb, and fired. A red bolt struck the ceiling with a loud thud, followed by the crackle of wood disintegrating in intense heat. The basement suddenly smelled like a campfire. A column of ashes, dust, and charred wood fell on her. Shooting at an angle would have been better, she scolded herself. The suit could help her make an augmented jump, but she opted instead for her grapple. A second scan revealed a pipe was embedded in the ceiling. She raised her arm, locked her elbow, and fired the grappling device from her wrist. 5 metal talons folded like a tight bud punched through the ceiling before blooming and seizing the pipe. The line extending from her wrist relayed sensory information into the fingers of her glove. She could feel the smooth, cold metal surface of the pipe and the grinding of plastered dust as she closed the talon around it. Before she tugged on the line to activate the winches built into the shoulder of the suit, she glanced at Sean. He jerked his thumb upwards.
Go!